Good morning. Just excuse my croaky voice. I'm just going through a cold, so hopefully it won't hold me back too much. So, aspects of immigration. So our aim is to develop an awareness of the what we hold here at Queensland Immigration and Shipping Resources. It's also to demonstrate a range of techniques that you might be able to use to find some of those elusive immigrant arrivals. Okay, shipping and immigration lists. So our holdings are, as you can see, a lot of the Australian indexes and lists that for 19th and early 20th century. We also have the useful websites for family historians. We subscribe to the databases Ancestry Library and Find My Past, so therefore you can come into the library to use those free of charge. You're just paying for anything that you're printing out. The other things, we also have newspapers, newspaper databases that you can find accounts from the ports of arrival, and we also have books on particular journeys of ships. So, shipping and immigration records. First thing you need to work out is when and where did they arrive. So you do that through looking at the death certificates, which can indicate time and place. They may also say how many years the person has been in a colony, so you can use that to work back to when they could have arrived. You also look at documented events, so when births occurred, census records, naturalisation records, and then you're looking at the last documented event in your country of origin, and then the first documented event in Australia. So that's how you work out your window. There are also things like obituaries in newspapers, diaries, letters, government records such as parliamentary papers, votes and proceedings, police gazettes, hospital records. All those sort of things can shed light on what maybe when they arrived or what ship they came on, etc. So passengers, you get your assisted and your unassisted. So assisted are the ones that have financial help at some level. So there also might be remittance passengers, so that's the same thing. They're getting help through the government, church, employers might be paying for them to come over, family and friends might be paying for them to come over, and these can be detailed, but the amount of information on them vary. With unassisted passengers, they're the tricky ones. There's very little detail. They're often just a Mr. or Mrs. or letters. They can include the crew, army that came out in the 1800s, civil servants, and they paid their own way if they were outside those groups. Just tell me if I'm going too fast. So I've been known to talk too fast. So finding immigrant arrivals. You need to cross-check your information. So there's chain migration, where one family member comes over and then they each nominate each other as the years go past. As we said before, those who paid may be listed with initials only, so you're not going to get a first name and you won't get that personal information. And also you might get family members coming out on the same ship, but they might be in different classes, so they won't be together listed on the list, but they might still be on the same ship. Okay, so finding immigrant arrivals. If you can't find them coming into Queensland, check the other states, even if the destination is Queensland, because they may have come through the journeys that were made were either through the Suez Canal or down the African coast and across. We'll cover that again. So they may come in, say, in Victoria and then work their way up. So if you can't find them in Queensland, you definitely need to check the other states. Individuals may also be recorded with names other than what people know them as. So that could just be because they had a nickname, but there could be many reasons as to why that's occurred. And of course, you're going to get errors in shipping lists. What people are writing down is not necessarily what the name is in the newspaper list, so you've got typing errors, that type of thing. You've got to take all those into consideration. So, as I was talking before, beware of the names. They may have been heard incorrectly, so they're going to be written down incorrectly. They may be spelt in various ways apart from the way that you would know. It's almost like the way people do now with common names, and they decide they've got to put an extra Y in there. They may also be transcribed incorrectly, or they might just be changed somehow. Now, the place of arrival may also be very different from the destination, in that they may have come into a different state, say South Australia or Victoria, and then come up the coast on a coastal vessel or some other way. And just because someone says they came together doesn't necessarily mean they came on the same ship. So this is just a general rule in search strategies. Try not to use more information than is strictly necessary, so less is better. Use truncation, which means that use something like an asterisk, that's your wild card. Just search for the first 3 letters of a name, if it's an unusual name, and try different variations of a name. If you find a name's been spelt more than one way, try those different ways and search as wide as possible. So this is the map that I was talking about. You can see that the journeys either they went down the coast and then around the bottom, or you've got going through the Suez and either through the Torres Strait Islands or down to Western Australia. Anyway, so what we've done is basically we've got an example following a family through and covering some of those points. So we've got the Wright family, and you've got documented events. So we've got the British Newspaper Archive, which is a database that we subscribe to. If you wanted to gain access to that, you'll have to access it here at the library. You can't access it from home, but it can be very useful. Anyway, there are records of children's births for the family. There's also records on the father of the family, Dr. Morden Wright, and his death. So then there's also the census records, which you can find on Ancestry or Find My Past, and we can locate them in the 1881 and then 1891 census records. And then we're using locating them on the shipping lists into Queensland, but also British lists. And finally, use of death and hospital records to help find more information. So, to begin with, you've got the British Newspaper Archive. You can do an advanced search, similar to if you've used the Trove newspaper databases, you can do an advanced search, specify dates, etc. It also allows for tagging and commenting the articles, which helps people later on search for things. It is, as I said, a subscription database. We hold it here, we subscribe to it here, so it's free to use here at the library. But you do need to have a login, and that's just their way of keeping track of who's, so you have to have an email address, but you don't pay for it except if you're printing. They've also got quite an extensive collection, and it is growing, but it can be clunky. So that's just an overview of that particular database. We used it to find, this is the Gascoigne Wright. He was the first child born for Morden Wright. So that's just the birth notice in the Morning Post. So he was born in 1860. So this is the 1881 census. Up here is the father, Morden Wright, and you've got the children being listed. So Gascoigne, Cheverell, William, Percy, Montague, Arabella, another Morden, Reginald. So we're going to follow those names through. Another thing to be aware of, we have a web page on our website called Useful Websites for Family Historians, and these have a number of the websites that we use. We've made sure that they're quality websites. They're organised alphabetically within the geographic locations. The first one we're going to have a look at on this slide is the Queensland State Archives. So if you're wanting to access it from this website, you'd go to Queensland, locate Queensland State Archives, and in that there is a link to the immigration indexes. So this is what the indexes would look like when you go to the State Archives website. And the one we particularly want is the assisted immigration. And you'll notice there that it gives you access to digital copies. So we hold those passenger lists here at the library on microfilm, but they've been digitised, so it's something that you can print out or save at home. So we go to, when you scroll down the page of that index, you come to the listings by alphabet, and what we want is the letter W. So that is the first Wright to arrive in Australia was actually Cheverell. He arrived in Normanton via the Thursday Island, and he arrived before his father's death, so he arrived in 1884. He was an unassisted passenger, so there's no given name, just initials.
Sorry, was this just Queensland?
Yes, this is Queensland.
Would it be the same thing that I checked New South Wales through that website?
No. No, you can through the useful websites for family historians.
Okay.
And we've gone, that particular slide is off the Queensland State Archives website.
Okay.
So for New South Wales, you would go to the State Records of New South Wales, and again there'll be a link to the indexes from there.
Great, thank you.
So this is the passenger list for Cheverell, arriving in 1884. There he is down the bottom. You can notice that he's actually come as a part of a group of men. Okay, so the next step was locating newspaper articles on Morden Wright. He was a parish doctor and he was the father. So this is from December of 1884, just a bit about, he was reporting in relation to smallpox.
And there are a lot of his reports, every grim thing.
He's so fascinated by the most gruesome detail.
In 1886, Dr. Morden Wright died. You'll notice this is a notice out of the Birmingham Daily Post. It's suggesting that he committed suicide. So you go on to find there was actually an inquest done, and it was found that he didn't actually commit suicide. He died of natural causes, but because there was these rumours, they had to have an inquest for it. So again, you're finding out information about the family. So you've got to think, well, if the father's died, he was a widower, now what happens with the rest of the family? So Percy was the next one to head to Australia. He's come out on the Duke of Buccleuch, and he's come out as steerage.
Sorry, how did you say that word? Duke of?
Is it Buccleuch? Buccleuch. I know, I always want to put a sh on the end, but it's not. So then the next thing was, when did the two brothers arrive? Montague, who this is the death certificate for, and Morden, who, as you can see, was the witness down here. So as this death happened in January of 1890, we know that they must have arrived before then, and the father died in 1886, so they've come out in that time period. So then the next step was it was to try and find the names. Now we were able to find you would go back to that index that I briefly showed up before for the names, for the surnames, and we would have found Montague, because that's a pretty unusual name, and you can see that he's there under a remittance. But the only way that we were able to work out that this particular one was actually our Morden was because he arrived with his brother. So he's come as steerage, so he's had his way paid for him. But because we know that they've come out on the same ship, they're both getting off at Thursday Island, which is where the other brother was, the first one that came out. We know that it has to be him. The next, and that's just highlighting it a bit better. So they came out on the Charbessa in 1888. So the next one to arrive were actually the three siblings, Arabella, Violet and Reginald. Now, going by this index, you wouldn't know that that was Arabella because they've used her initials and then they've used her third name as the name that she's gone by. So to begin with, you wouldn't know that, so you'd have to try searching maybe for Reginald or Violet. Now we know that I'll show you in a minute that they did all come out together. The only way that we found out that it was actually Arabella was because there was a notice in the newspaper report because she made a complaint. So, and they've actually used her name Arabella and come out on the Jumna. So that's another thing that we were talking about before, to be aware that they might be on the passenger lists under a different name, especially if they've got more than one name. And then here's the passenger list of the three siblings together in steerage on the Jumna. Okay, so to find the last child to come out, George Alfred Carthew Wright. So we know he's on the 1891 census, and I'll show you that in a minute. And Find My Past allows us to see that. And if you check the Queensland State Archives records, we can find him on the Croydon Hospital Admissions Register in 1901. It says he arrived on the Makara, and then he's also deployed again in 1903. Same father and English address, and 7 years in the colony. So this is from our Find My Past, and that's the 1891 census. Shows that he was at the school. It's the Royal Asylum of St Anne's Society, and it is for children who have once moved in a superior station of life. Okay, so to find George Wright coming in, you can look for him on the Queensland ones, which we did so and couldn't locate him. So we've come at it from another direction. On Find My Past, under Travel and Migration, there is a database. Let me find, and it's called Passengers Leaving UK 1890 to 1960. So that's what we're doing the search for. So we know that in 1891 he was still in England, and by 1901 he has arrived in Australia and Queensland.
Sorry, would that show results for people whose status come up from New South Wales to Queensland as well?
No, that particular index.
Yeah. That's just the international arrival.
Yeah, it's Find My Past, and it's passengers leaving the UK.
Right. Okay.
So that would show people going to not just Queensland, show passengers going to Canada, to the US, So if you're looking for someone after that 1890 period, not just coming to Australia, but yeah, not
Yeah,
coastal.
coastal sort of.
Yeah, not
I know
coastal.
she arrived in New South Wales and she died in Queensland, so she had to get this.
Okay, so this says that a GAC, which matches the initials for our person, left in 1893. And that is the passenger list for the Macara, so that matches up with the Croydon hospital register that he did come out on that ship. And you could just see it down the bottom there. That's his name. Now, the next step is, well, why couldn't we find it on the Queensland lists? The reason being, he's down as a Mrs. G.S. Wright. But it has to be him because it's the only Wright arriving on the Macara that's getting off at Thursday Island, which is where he was heading. So, again, one source, another source gets it totally wrong. So you need to make sure that you're going to more than one source to find your information. So now on to immigration in the 1860s. So that was the 1880s. That was when the British India Steam Navigation had a contract with Queensland, and they would come out regularly in the 1880s. And we actually have a book upstairs in our collection on that particular line and the ships that came out. So, immigration in the 1860s was a particularly busy time for Queensland. Unfortunately, it is also the least records available because they were lost in the 1893 floods. So those not on what lists are available can be found in shipping records of other states, biographies. They might mention it in their obituary, what ship they came out on, and local histories. And as those who came via the US, New Zealand, or non-government assisted ships may not be on the lists. We're particularly going to concentrate on the Lady Bowen. This arrived in Brisbane. It was a Queensland coastal vessel, but its first voyage out here, because it was built in Scotland, it brought paying immigrants to Queensland. Now, the list that's available in Queensland is, of course, just a newspaper list. Except that one of our volunteers has now found a passenger list for the Lady Bowen at the National Archives out at Cannon Hill. So there is a list, but previous to when we only found that out this morning, so previous to that, the only list that we knew of in Queensland was the list of saloon passengers that were listed in the newspaper. So where do we go from there? Well, through Trove, you can find that the Lady Bowen actually called into Sydney for repair. Therefore, because Sydney lists have ships entering, so any ships, coastal or not, entering Sydney, there's going to be a list for. So we can know that we can check the New South Wales lists for a passenger list, because we know that they're pulled in to have some repairs done to some trifling damage. So this is the passenger list that's available. You can view it through Ancestry. We've also got it on microfilm upstairs. It's from the State Records of New South Wales. And it's just, as you can see, it's just a list of the crew, and then you've got passengers listed there. And so you've just got names, basically. So this is how you would go about locating this particular, or unassisted lists into New South Wales. You go to their indexes online. You've got, you can see under A they've got assisted immigrants, and it says C, immigration, and also shipping. So you could go to immigration. Under immigration, there's a list for unassisted passenger and crew arrivals 1854 to 1900. And that is a website called Mariners and Ships in Australian Waters. you can do a search, you can do a Google search basically on it, or you can browse by year and month. So we knew that from that newspaper article what year and month the ship came in.
Sorry, can we access this from home?
This particular website, yes. So it came in into New South Wales, into Sydney in 1864 in June. And there is the Lady Bowen, and it departed from Greenock. And then this is a list of the ship passengers and the crew. So it's a printed list of that handwritten list I showed you before. Finally, we'll just touch briefly on German immigration. So Germans began arriving in Queensland via Hamburg from 1850. Now there are problems with name variations, spelling of the ship's names, missing ship records. There are inaccuracies as many of them didn't speak English, so how their names are heard. There is one set of indexes for immigrants from Hamburg, 1850 to 1879. We have this on CD, we also have it in book format and on microfiche. So we've got several versions of it. It's done by Eric Kapicki and his wife. We were doing a search for an Adeline mask. And we end up finding her as Adeline Marzke. So you have, and the way this was found was the CD enabled us to do a search of the first name. So you can just Adeline, and then you look through and look for the name that would look the most obvious for the name that you're searching for. Yeah, no, you have to do that here. It's a CD that we hold here. I don't believe they had those, no.
That's available on the Public Records Office in Victoria, which...
Yeah, no, this one, no, we were talking about the CD previous, the Immigrant from Hamburg list previously. Okay, this is another version of for a German person. It also covers that what we were talking about before, where people who might have arrived in Queensland, the records are going to be recorded in a different port. So we were looking for a Mrs. Harbrecht, who arrived in Queensland. There's no Queensland list, but there is a Victorian list. Because of the way the name is spelt, we've done, you do a search just with the first three letters and a wild card to try and pick up the way the rest of the surname would be spelt. And you can see that the way it ended up being spelt was without the extra E. So it came. She came in 1886 on the Katana. This is the passenger list. It arrived at the Port of Melbourne. That's her name there, and it says en route to Queensland. So you will find that with quite a few Queensland lists. So it is always, as I have to stress, can't find them in Queensland, just check the other states. Also, the Victorian list, they have that index to outward passengers, which includes interstate. So if they come in and they've gotten off there, then you can see that then it'll be listed as a ship going interstate. And so, and you see her name has changed yet again. Finally, with missing German list, there is a family history group, the Burwood Family History Group, who puts out this ancestry journal, which has articles on 26 missing German lists. For example, 2 of the Bremen ships of the 1850s, the Solon and Diane, that came to Moreton Bay, have been included in these lists, articles in these journal, and they contain partial reconstructed lists. We currently have a volunteer going through these booklets to create an index to enable us to help you, our clients, to locate some of these people that you probably won't locate any other way. So, missing German lists. Sources include indexes to births, including marine births, and often they'll be in consecutive registration numbers with the German names. Again, with indexes to marriage where there are sequential numbering and German names. Naturalisations, often on naturalisation records, you can find a ship name mentioned. Alien registrations in World War I. Again, newspapers with the golden and diamond wedding anniversaries. You can often get a mention of a ship or a year that they arrived in. Obituaries, Trove, hospital and asylum records all help you shed light on where you can find more information. There's also things like registers of prisoners, police gazettes, missing persons, absconders, prohibited immigrants, deserters. You've got the New South Wales unemployment registers, National Archives files, and lots more. So, just final thing is, if you're wanting to find out about the ships themselves, we have 2 info guides that you would have seen up at the desks, shipping lists, which is mainly links to indexes, etc. And then there's a more than list, which gives you guides to where you can find more information. We also, at the Family History Desk on Level 3, there is Charlie's list. Charlie is one of our volunteers. He spent a lot of time in the other institutions like National Archives and Queensland State Archives, creating these ship lists, which brings all those sources together. And ships lists are organised, those lists are organised either alphabetically by the ship's name or by the date of arrival. So you can look, there are 2 versions of it. And this is what I was talking about, the British India Steam Navigation Company. It's a book that relates specifically to that line. So if you've got ancestors that came out during the 1880s period, this gives you a bit of information on the ship that they came out on. Finally, so identify the window of arrival. So when they were last in one country, when they were first in Australia. Different information provided for assisted and unassisted passengers. You can search beyond the place of arrival for shipping lists, so don't just, if you can't find something in Queensland, go to the other states. Beware of the variant spelling, so that there are spelling mistakes. Nicknames might be used, but they're not the passenger list name that might be registered. Ships' names change, so the family story might have been one way, but the actual name of the ship is something different. And just to broaden your awareness of records other than shipping lists, which can help you find that ship and the time of arrival.